I stood by the grand entrance, my hand instinctively smoothing the silk of my best amethyst dress, when a young woman with a headset perched on a high stool behind a velvet rope glanced up from her tablet. "Name?" she asked, her voice a little too loud over the jazz trio. "Eleanor Vance," I replied, trying to project warmth, a sense of belonging. She tapped a few keys, her brow furrowing slightly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. I don't see an Eleanor on the guest list for the Willow Creek Manor event." Before I could even process her words, a familiar, bright laugh cut through the elegant chatter. "Oh, that's because she's not actually on the list, darling," my daughter-in-law Chloe said, gliding up in a shimmering silver gown, a glass of champagne in hand. Her smile was wide, practiced, and utterly devoid of warmth. "But thank you for coming all this way, Eleanor. You look present." I felt a sudden chill. Despite the warmth of the early autumn evening, my gaze flickered from Chloe's perfectly made-up face to the embarrassed young woman at the table. "I'm David's mother. I wanted to say I helped pay for this house." But the words caught in my throat. Chloe's smile didn't falter, a triumphant gleam in her eyes, no apology, no confusion, no offer to check with someone. Just that bright, cold grin and a dismissive flick of her wrist towards the bustling ballroom, where the music swelled and crystal clinked. Somewhere beyond those ornate doors, my son David was laughing, toasting, celebrating his new life in the home I'd helped make possible. I stood in the marble foyer, my amethyst dress with its delicate lace sleeves, chosen with such care 2 weeks ago, not because it was expensive, but because it made me feel like someone who mattered, someone who wouldn't be overlooked. I'd styled my silver hair myself, even pinned on the small sapphire brooch Arthur had given me on our 30th anniversary. I hadn't worn it since his funeral, and now here I was, dismissed. My mouth went dry. I turned slowly to Chloe. This must be some mistake. "Oh, I don't think so, dear," she purred, tilting her head, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Look, the guest list is quite exclusive tonight. We're at capacity, and we really can't have any unexpected additions. You know how these things are. Perhaps there's another event you're meant to be at." My knees almost buckled, not from age, but from the sheer, crushing humiliation. I was being politely, publicly, asked to leave the housewarming party for a home I had poured my life savings into. And she knew. Of course, she knew. The girl at the table looked mortified now, glancing between us as if she'd made an unforgivable error. "Should I check again?" But Chloe leaned in, her voice firm. "She's not expected," she stated. "Let's not make a scene." A scene? Is that what they feared from me? That I'd raise my voice or throw my clutch or sob in front of the glittering chandeliers? No, that wasn't me. So I nodded once. "I understand." I turned without another word, walked past the valet, who offered me a puzzled look, and stepped out into the crisp mountain air. Willow Creek's sun was sinking low, painting the distant peaks in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the rows of luxury cars. My old Subaru Outback sat quietly between a polished Mercedes and a sleek electric SUV. As I walked to it, my chest burned, not from shame that had passed the moment Chloe smiled, but from something older, something quieter. Grief, I think, a new kind. Inside the car, I sat still, my hands resting on the wheel, my dress smooth across my knees. It was only then that the anger started, slow, methodical. My name wasn't on the list. Oh, but my bank transfers were. Over $200,000 sent discreetly to David and Chloe's account, earmarked for the down payment on Willow Creek Manor, just as David had requested, so they could take all the credit for their self-made success. His words, not mine. At the time, I said yes because I thought I was saying yes to a future where my son still included me. Because I thought this gesture, this expensive, generous, life-altering gesture, would rebuild something. I told myself, it's not about pride, Eleanor. It's about love. Let them have their moment. And I believed it. I believed that love meant sacrificing your place in the light so someone else could shine. I believed that if I just stayed quiet, just stayed helpful, I'd be allowed to belong. But as the heavy oak doors of the manor shut behind me, I realized something else. I had been erased, and it wasn't new. This wasn't the first time I'd been left off a list. Not the first time David hadn't called, hadn't checked in. Not the first time I'd been too simple or too earnest or just a bit much for these kinds of events. The difference was, this time, I had funded the entire performance. I'd paid for the stage, the actors, the lights, the script, and now they wanted me to sit quietly outside the theater. No, I started the car. The manor shrank in the rearview mirror. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't curse them. That would have been too easy. I simply drove. And as I passed the local nursery, where I'd bought the heirloom rose bushes for Chloe's new garden, 12 bushes of peace roses, her favorite, I pulled over and opened my phone. The bank app lit up. So did the email from their real estate agent. And right then, my fingers stopped trembling. My back straightened. My thoughts clicked into place like gears in a clock. They hadn't put my name on the guest list, but they were about to learn just how important that name really was. And this time, there would be no mistake. I didn't go straight home. I needed the drive. I needed the miles between me and that grand foyer where my name hadn't mattered. Willow Creek blurred by, the quaint stone shops, the slow-moving couples, the bakery, with the gingerbread scent Arthur and I used to love. Everything looked the same, only I had changed. I stopped at a red light and glanced at the envelope resting on the passenger seat. Inside, the card I'd signed that morning. For your beautiful new beginning, with all my love, Mom. And a cashier's check for $25,000. A housewarming gift. A soft landing for unexpected expenses. I'd tucked it in with care, thinking it would be a private, quiet gift. No fuss, no credit. Now it looked absurd. I'd prepared for an ending they'd already written me out of. When I reached my house, the small, cozy cottage on Elm Street with the porch swing Arthur built and the wisteria vine he planted, the sun had nearly set. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of my bed, toes resting against the worn rug, and just listened to the stillness, the kind of silence that isn't peace, but proof. No one was going to call. No one was going to ask where I was. They had all the guests they needed. I changed out of my dress carefully, folded it, smoothed the silk, laid it over the back of the armchair. Then I walked barefoot into the kitchen and opened the drawer beside the sink. Inside, stacked in folders, were bank statements, invoices, printed emails. I pulled out the one labeled Willow Creek Manor. Yes, David, my son. Not Dave, not D. Vance Escar, the corporate smooth name he now used. He was David when I first held him, red and squirming, with his father's stubborn chin and my mother's eyes. He was David when he clung to my leg after kindergarten. He was David when I stayed up nights mending his worn jeans because he outgrew them faster than I could afford new ones. And now I was just his mother, a logistical nuisance, a line item not worth including. I opened the folder, receipts, email threads, contracts with the real estate agency, itemized lists, mortgage documents, landscaping bills, the architect's fees. It totaled just over $212,000, all paid by me, quietly, through my accounts, just as he asked, except he hadn't asked. Chloe had. Polite, polished, smiling over herbal tea, explaining how it would be a gift that meant the world to David, how he just wouldn't accept it if he knew it came from me. I'd believed her, believed she was trying to help us all connect. I didn't see it then, how she framed me as a barrier, not a blessing. She'd crafted a version of me I barely recognized, someone easy to leave off a list. I stared at the bottom of one contract. Final landscaping payment scheduled. September 14th, 6 a.m. That was tomorrow, meaning there was still time. I picked up the phone and dialed. Willow Creek Savings, this is Brenda, came the voice on the other end. Hello, Brenda. This is ELEANOR VANCE. I'd like to speak to my personal accounts manager, please. A pause, then cheerful efficiency. Yes, Mrs. Vance. One moment while I connect you. Click. Then a different voice, brisk and warm. Mrs. Vance, it's Mr. Henderson. What can I do for you this evening? Mr. Henderson, I said calmly, I need you to halt all pending transactions related to the Vance Hawthorne property at Willow Creek Manor immediately. A pause, typing. Ma'am, that includes several payments scheduled within the next 12 hours. Landscaping, smart home, installation, the final installment for the custom kitchen. Is there a particular concern? Yes, I said. The concern is that the people hosting the housewarming for that property made sure I wasn't invited. Silence. I'm very sorry to hear that, Mr. Henderson said slowly. But technically, these were authorized payments. Some might already be in process. Then stop whatever hasn't cleared and flag anything else. I'll accept the penalty fees. I understand. Give me just a moment to check the transaction queue. I waited, staring at the wilting bouquet of wildflowers I'd bought for myself a week ago, now drooping in a ceramic vase. Chloe had insisted on fresh, white orchids for the manor. Mr. Henderson returned. We can halt the final landscaping payment, the balance for the smart home system, and the custom kitchen installment. The architect's final fee has cleared. So has the initial deposit for the security system. Everything else can be stopped before morning. Do it, I said. Yes, ma'am. I'll follow up with confirmation emails. Would you like us to notify the vendors? No, I said. I'll handle it. After I hung up, I sat in silence again, not waiting for tears this time, not mourning. Something else was blooming inside me, a calm, sharp awareness. They wanted me invisible, but now invisibility would be their problem. I picked up the envelope again, the gift they didn't want, and slid the check out. I ripped it neatly down the center, then again into quarters, tiny pieces scattered like confetti on the kitchen floor. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the real estate agency. Willow Creek Properties. This is Sarah. Hello, Sarah. This is ELEANOR Vance. A beat. Oh, Mrs. Vance, is everything all right? No, I said. but I'm going to make it all right. I could hear her swallow. I need to cancel all pending services for the Vance Hawthorne property, effective immediately. But that's tomorrow. She trailed off, flustered. Mrs. Vance, the landscapers, the installers, that's dozens of people. Are you sure? They're not my concern anymore, I said. None of them are. By morning, Willow Creek was buzzing. I knew because Sarah called back twice. First at 7, then again just before 9, her voice rising in pitch and desperation with each ring. Mrs. Vance, the contractors need confirmation. They're threatening to pull their crews. The kitchen company is panicking. We have a full housewarming party tonight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I already confirmed my cancellation, I said. The payments have been stopped. The services will not be rendered. Let whoever was going to take the credit take the cost too. There was a silence long enough that I imagined her blinking into the receiver, trying to decide whether to argue or plead. Then she muttered, I'll inform the Vances. You do that. I ended the call and turned off the phone. I'd said all I needed to. Outside, the air was warm and heavy. Summer still lingered, even as September tried to usher in cool mornings and early sunsets. I stepped onto the porch and sat down slowly, my knees complaining in that familiar nagging way. I stared at the quiet street, same neighbors, same trees, same porch swing, swaying slightly in the breeze. But I wasn't the same. For years, I'd watched myself disappear in small ways, an invitation that didn't arrive, a thank you that never came, a story told as if I hadn't lived it, hadn't funded it, hadn't loved through it. I told myself it was the price of motherhood, the quiet sacrifice. Let them shine. Let them step forward. My job was done. But what they did yesterday wasn't forgetting. It was exclusion. It was removal. It was, in every sense, a severing, and I was done pretending it didn't matter. By noon, the first sign that the outside world had caught up came, not by phone, but by knock. I opened the door and found Maya, my granddaughter, standing on the porch, her hair still in a messy bun from last night's pre-party gathering, eyes wide with something between panic and awe. Grandma, she whispered, what did you do? I stepped aside to let her in. Come in, sweetheart. She dropped her backpack by the door and turned to face me, not even trying to hide her distress. The contractors are calling everyone. There's no custom kitchen, no smart home system. The real estate agent says the payment was revoked. Dad is losing his mind. Chloe's crying. Her parents are threatening to sue the agency. I raised a hand. Sit down, Maya. She sank onto the couch like someone had pulled the strings out of her. You canceled everything. I did. But why? I looked at her carefully. This girl, this only true light left in that fractured family. She'd always seen me, visited, asked questions, remembered birthdays, held my hand at Arthur's funeral. I owed her the truth. They didn't want me there, I said. Your father and Chloe made that very clear. Maya's face turned red. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I thought you were coming. I assumed they knew I'd paid for everything. I interrupted gently. But they didn't want me in the room. They wanted my money, not my presence. Her voice broke. That's disgusting. No, sweetheart, I said, softening. It's honest. For once, I see it clearly. She blinked away tears, then sat upright. But what happens now? There's a whole housewarming tonight. People flying in, caterers, a band. What are they going to do? I imagine, I said, standing slowly. They'll do what grown adults do when life doesn't go as planned. They'll figure it out. And you? She asked. What are you going to do? I gave her a thin smile. I'm going to open a new account in your name. She looked stunned. Wait, what? I nodded. The money I'd set aside for their house, the new car David wanted, the trips Chloe planned. It's going somewhere it's wanted, somewhere it matters. I want to set up a trust for your education, your future, whatever you need. She shook her head, tears starting again. Grandma, I didn't ask for... I know you didn't. I touched her cheek. That's why it's yours. We sat in silence for a while. Maya curled into the corner of the couch, me in the old armchair by the window. Outside, a hummingbird darted to the feeder. The wind shifted. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. Does he know? She asked finally. Dad, that I canceled everything. I expect he does by now. And what about you, being the one who paid for it all? I tilted my head. I imagine that part's just starting to dawn on him. Maya rubbed at her eyes. I wish I could be a fly on the wall. I smiled. No need to be a fly. You'll get the fallout soon enough. A beat. Are you okay? She asked, voice small. I'm tired, I said honestly. But I'm not sorry. She stood, walked over, and knelt at my feet like she used to when she was a little girl playing tea party. I love you, she said simply. I reached for her hands. I know, and I love you. That's why I did this. We stayed like that for a while, old and young, linked not by guilt or performance, but truth. That evening, long after she'd gone, the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't answer. I already knew who it was. I waited until the second knock to get up. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the silence to speak first. I walked to the front door slowly, my slippers making no sound on the hardwood floor. Through the peephole, I saw exactly who I expected. David. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore, just a wrinkled polo shirt and slacks like he'd thrown them on in a hurry. His jaw was clenched tight. Not worry, not guilt, control. David never led with emotion. He led with strategy. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Mom, he said, breath tight, we need to talk. I looked at him for a moment. My son, taller than his father ever was, gray already threading through his hair. His eyes, Arthur's eyes, couldn't meet mine. So talk, I said, resting one hand on the doorframe. Can I come in? No, that stopped him. He blinked, almost like he hadn't considered that possibility. David was used to being granted entry. He glanced behind him, then leaned closer. Chloe's in a panic. The kitchen company is threatening legal action. The landscapers have pulled out. Guests are arriving. What the hell is going on? I crossed my arms. I canceled the payments. I know that, he snapped. Why? I stared at him. Because I wasn't invited. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Jesus, Mom, is this really about that? I tilted my head. You mean the part where your wife laughed in my face and told the staff I wasn't on the guest list? Or the part where you stood there and said nothing? That wasn't how it was supposed to go. But it did. That's how it went. And you let it happen. He looked away, jaw working. I watched him for a beat, then added, and yet, somehow, my money was allowed to attend. Don't do that. Do what? Turn this into some kind of martyr thing? You said you didn't want credit. You insisted on staying anonymous. We thought, No, I cut in. You didn't think at all. You used me. And when it came time to honor me, you erased me. That's not true, he said. But it didn't have teeth. You're twisting things. I nodded slowly. All right, let's untwist them. Tell me, at what point did you decide I wasn't welcome? He flinched. That's what I thought, I said quietly. There was a long silence between us. He shifted his weight, hands on his hips, then dropped them again. Chloe thought, he began, but I stopped him with a raised hand. Don't you dare blame this on your wife. I don't care if she whispered it or screamed it. You made the decision. You let it happen. You let me stand there like a fool, David. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And I think, just maybe, he felt a flicker of shame. So now what? He asked finally, voice lower. You've tanked your own son's housewarming out of spite? No, I said calmly. I've reclaimed my dignity. He looked at me like I was speaking a different language. I leaned against the frame. You've been borrowing pieces of me for years. My savings, my name, my time, my forgiveness. And I gave it all freely because I believed you loved me. Even if you didn't show it well, even if you'd changed. But yesterday, my throat tightened for the first time. Yesterday, you told the world that I'm disposable, and I heard you loud and clear. He swallowed. His voice turned hard again. We can't afford to fix this on our own. There are penalties, contracts, reputations, and none of that was my concern until today, I asked. You want the money, David? Then you get me with it. That's the deal. Always was. You just didn't like the terms anymore. He was quiet. Then he said, So what? You're done with us now? After everything? I stared at him. What is everything exactly? 1,000 small slights, a decade of distance. You stopped being my son the day you decided I was an obstacle. His expression changed. Anger, then desperation. Mom, no, I said, and this time my voice didn't waver. You don't get to call me that today. We stood like that for a long time. Two people with blood in common and not much else. Then I stepped back and began to close the door. He caught it. Please, he said quietly this time. What do I tell them? I held his gaze. Tell them the truth. And I closed the door. This time he let it shut. The silence after the door clicked shut was different this time. It wasn't thick with regret or hesitation. It was clean, cold, like a room that had finally been aired out after years of staleness. I stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, listening. He didn't knock again. He didn't yell through the wood. He just stood there. I could feel it, then turned and left. I watched from the window as he walked down the front path, shoulders hunched, steps uneven. My David, not the son I raised, the one who scraped his knee and came running to me with tears and trust, but the man who had grown out of needing me and somewhere along the way grown into resenting me. That man walked down my path and didn't look back. I sat back down at the kitchen table. The envelope, now empty, still lay near the edge. Across from it, my tea from earlier, gone cold. The wildflowers I'd bought from my own table were starting to droop. Their stems bowed as if in mourning, fitting. Then, as if the universe had a sense of irony, my phone began to ring again. Chloe. Her name flashed on the screen, followed by a second ring, then a third. I let it vibrate in my hand before answering. I wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to hear what excuse she would find. I picked up, but didn't speak first. Eleanor. she said, her voice already in that strained register, soft, high, polished. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, I said, there hasn't. A pause. I'm sorry if you felt unwelcome yesterday. That wasn't our intention. You told the staff I wasn't on the list. Well, the list was coordinated through the planner. There may have been a mix-up. You laughed, Chloe. I interrupted. You looked me in the eye and laughed. Another pause, shorter this time. Her next words were clipped. I was under the impression that you wanted to remain in the background. David told me. I said I didn't want credit. I didn't say I wanted to be erased. Her breath caught. Okay, I see you're upset, and I understand, really, but we're in a very delicate situation right now. There are guests arriving. The manor's in chaos. The caterers say they won't come unless they're paid up front. Then pay them. She hesitated. We don't have that kind of liquidity on short notice. Everything was arranged under your... And now it's not, I said. Your event, your problem. Eleanor, she said sharply, the mask slipping. You can't just pull out last minute and expect everything to go smoothly. You pulled me out of the guest list, I replied. I'm just returning the favor. Another silence. Then, look, let's just be adults about this. Maybe we both made some mistakes. We can find a way to fix it together. I'm not interested in fixing this, Chloe. Then what do you want? She asked, and I could finally hear the panic she was trying to hide. I want my son to understand that actions have consequences, I said quietly. I want you both to feel, just for a moment, what it's like to be invisible, unwanted, cast aside. By ruining our housewarming? I almost laughed. I didn't ruin anything. I just took back what was mine. You know this is going to hurt David's reputation, his job, his partners. Everyone's here tonight. You're embarrassing him. I think he managed that on his own. She sighed through her teeth. I don't understand why you're doing this. No, I said. You don't. And that's the problem. And I hung up. It felt like slamming a door. Even though it was only a touch of a button, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was final. Later that afternoon, I made a cup of fresh tea, hot this time, and sat out on the back porch. The birds were out, pecking at the feeder Arthur had hung years ago. My knees still ached. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. But for the first time in what felt like years, my spine sat straight. By 4 hours, the text messages started. Maya sent the first one. Grandma, they're trying to rebook a local restaurant. It's a mess. Dad's on the phone with a lawyer. Then, a few minutes later, caterers walked out. Band never arrived. Some guests are leaving already. I didn't reply, not yet. At 5:30, a call came in from an unknown number. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, a voicemail. I listened to it with the speaker off. It was David again. His voice sounded like sandpaper. Mom, look, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about yesterday, about how it was handled. We didn't think you'd come. You said you didn't want attention. We thought it was better that way. I was trying to protect the moment. He paused, as if trying to decide whether to go further. I didn't want to humiliate you, but I guess I did. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Can we please talk before tonight? He didn't say, I love you. He didn't say, come back. I deleted the message without saving it. Then I looked out at the trees again. The wind had picked up. The sky was starting to turn, and I thought, good, Let them scramble. Let them taste a little of what silence feels like when it answers your reach. By 6, I could imagine the grand foyer at the manor sitting dark. The musicians, if they'd even bothered to show, packing up their instruments, annoyed. The servers returning their pressed uniforms. The real estate agent pacing with her headset askew, whispering frantic apologies into the void. And the guests, dressed in their best, standing around, holding warm flutes of flat champagne. No music, no food, no hosts, just confusion, whispers, and the slow, visible unraveling of an event that was supposed to be perfect. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was truth, finally standing up for itself. The next knock came just before 7. Not David, not Chloe, not Maya. It was a young man in a crisp shirt with a clipboard, nervous, sweating slightly despite the evening breeze. His tie was crooked, and his voice stumbled. "Mrs. Vance?" I nodded. "Hi. I'm Ethan from Willow Creek Properties. I was told to bring this." He held out a thick folder. "It's a copy of your contract and the original receipts for the property services. Sarah asked me to deliver it personally and, to apologize. She said she had no idea about the guest list situation." I didn't take the folder right away. I studied his face. He looked barely 23, the kind of boy who still called his mother for cooking advice, completely out of his depth. "I'm not angry at your agency, Ethan," I said. "I'm angry at my son." Relief flashed across his face. "Thank you, ma'am. Sarah really didn't know. She said she thought you were some great aunt." I allowed myself a dry laugh. "That's generous. Tell her not to worry." He nodded and handed me the folder. "She also asked if you'd be willing to speak with the construction manager. He's demanding clarification. They've got crews still on site waiting for answers." I raised an eyebrow. "They're still holding the house?" "Technically," he said, shifting his feet, "it's reserved until midnight, but with no final payment, they can't complete the work or staff it. They're threatening legal action, but Sarah said if you confirm the cancellation directly, it might help." I glanced at the clock on the wall inside. 7:03 p.m., the time the first toast was supposed to begin. "I'll make the call," I said. "Thank you for delivering this." Ethan hesitated at the edge of the porch. "Mrs. Vance, just between us, I've worked on a lot of these big projects. Some are showy, some are sweet. But the minute I saw Chloe, I kind of knew." He paused, then added almost shyly, "I hope you're okay." I smiled, not wide, but real. "I am." He tipped his head and left. Once inside, I opened the folder. Neat printouts, all my transfers, my emails, even the architect's renderings Chloe had picked. Pages of sterile white with captions like luxury minimalism and modern elegance. Not one mention of my name. I picked up the landline, still more reliable than my cell for long calls, and dialed the construction company's direct number. A woman answered, brisk, annoyed. "This is Brenda, project supervisor at Mountain View Builds. Who am I speaking with?" "Eleanor Vance," I said, "the original sponsor of the Willow Creek Manor property." The change in her voice was immediate. "Oh, Mrs. Vance. Yes, we've been trying to reach you. I'm calling to confirm that the remaining payments have been canceled," I said. "You are under no obligation to continue work on the property. Please consider the contracts null." "We understand," she said, trying to keep it professional. It's just some crews are still on site. We've informed them that the project has been postponed, but no one is giving us clear direction. Let me be clear then, I said. There is no longer a project. Not here. Not under my name. Another pause, then softer. Understood. May I ask, is everything all right? No, I said, but it will be. After I hung up, I poured myself another cup of tea and brought it to the living room. The windows were open. I could hear the distant hum of the town, cars, laughter, the occasional honk. Somewhere out there, my son was facing the music he thought I would pay for. The phone buzzed again. A message from Maya. Grandma, I think you should know. Chloe's parents just found out they didn't pay for anything. They're furious. Chloe's father's yelling at Dad. People are leaving. Some of them know it was you who canceled everything. I think they know it was you who paid too. I didn't reply. What could I say? Good. Let them know. They should have known all along. They should have looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you, Eleanor. We're grateful. Please join us." Instead, they had shut the door in my face and assumed I would keep funding the house they'd locked me out of. Let them feel it now, the draft that rushes in when the foundation gives way. Let them scramble. Let them explain. Let them sit in silence and wonder how it all fell apart. I finished my tea and turned off the lights in the living room. Tonight, they could learn how it feels when absence is not an accident, but a decision. The house was quiet, but not heavy, not the kind of quiet that creeps in after an argument or lingers like smoke after disappointment. This was something else. This was calm. I hadn't had that kind of peace in years. By 8, I'd stopped checking the time. The night was moving on without me, and I had no intention of chasing it. I sat at my kitchen table, my table, in my home, and read the newspaper from front to back for the first time in months. I underlined a casserole recipe, clipped a local history column. I even laughed out loud at a comic strip that Arthur used to hate. I just stood to wash my teacup when I heard the knock. It was Fleur this time, not rushed, not demanding. I opened the door and saw Maya. She looked exhausted. Her boots were in her hand, her bun falling apart, eyeliner smudged slightly beneath her eyes. But when she looked at me, something in her expression softened. "Hi," she said. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She sat down at the kitchen table like she had when she was little, legs crossed, resting her chin in her hands. I poured us both fresh water and set the glasses down. We sat in silence for a few moments. She didn't cry, and I didn't push. Finally, she spoke. You should have seen their faces when the construction manager told them the contracts were canceled. I said nothing. My dad tried to spin it, said there was some clerical error. Chloe blamed the agency, but people were asking questions, and someone, I don't know who, said they heard you were the real sponsor. She looked up at me. And that you pulled the plug. I met her eyes. They're not wrong. She gave a small, bitter laugh. Well, that's when Chloe's parents lost it. Her father was shouting, called Dad a fraud, said he'd embarrassed them in front of their friends. Chloe was crying, saying the housewarming was cursed. I raised an eyebrow. Cursed? She said it's what happens when certain people bring their energy around, things meant to be elegant. There it was. Even through the cracks, her true voice rang out. Maya saw the flash in my expression and leaned forward. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I didn't know they were going to do that to you. I didn't think. She hesitated. I didn't think they'd go that far. You always hoped your father was better than that, I said gently. She nodded. I took her hand. So did I, she swallowed. Do you regret canceling everything? I looked at her for a long moment. No, not for a second. She exhaled, relief and sadness twining together. They didn't just exclude you, she said. They used you, then tried to pretend you were never part of it. I let them, I said quietly. For years, I wanted so badly to believe that if I gave enough, eventually I'd be invited in again. Maya wiped her cheek. What happens now? I looked out the window. The stars had started to come out. 1, 2, then a scatter of faint white dust above the rooftops. Now, I said, they'll have to figure out who they are without my money. She stared at me. You really mean that? I do. All of it. Another pause. Grandma, she said slowly, would you come with me? Just for a drive. I don't want to go home yet. I hesitated. I hadn't planned to leave the house tonight, but something in her face, some mixture of grief and loyalty, made me nod. All right, I said. Let me get my shoes. We drove through Willow Creek with the windows down. The air was warm, the streets mostly empty now. We didn't speak for a while. I watched the town I'd never left, the place that had held every version of me, the girl, the wife, the widow, the mother, and now perhaps something new. Maya pulled into the parking lot behind a small hilltop overlook, the kind with a rusted fence and a single wooden bench where teenagers made promises they wouldn't keep, and old folks came to watch the stars. We got out and walked to the edge. Below us, the town lights flickered. Somewhere down there, my son was pacing in a rented shirt, trying to salvage a night that had been built on a lie. I keep thinking about how you must have felt, Maya said, voice quiet, standing there at the entrance. It wasn't the first time, I said. She turned to me. They've been closing doors on me for years. This was just the first time they did it out loud. Maya took a shaky breath. I'll never understand how they could do that to you. They don't need me, I said simply. They need what I give, but that's over now. She was quiet for a long time, then almost in a whisper. I'm glad you said no. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman she was becoming. Honest, sharp, capable of seeing the whole truth, not just the polite version. Me too, I said. We sat there until the stars outnumbered the headlights, until my knees started to stiffen and the night got cooler. Then we drove home, and I didn't feel alone anymore. By the next morning, I'd received 6 more calls. 2 from David, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, likely Chloe's mother, and 3 from the real estate agency, though the last came in at nearly midnight, long after I'd turned the ringer off and settled into bed with a book. I didn't answer any of them. I slept well, better than I had in years. I didn't dream about apologies or reconciliations. I didn't hope for a message saying they'd change their minds. I simply rested. When I woke, the house felt different, as if the walls had finally stopped holding their breath. I made coffee, fried 2 eggs, and ate them slowly by the window. My newspaper was still folded neatly on the table. A breeze came in through the screen door. The wildflowers on the counter had begun to brown at the edges, not dramatically, just quietly fading, the way things do when they've been used up. At 10:30, the doorbell rang again. I opened the door to find David standing there, not panicked this time, not frantic, just tired. He had dark circles under his eyes and hadn't shaved. His tie was missing, and the first button of his shirt was undone. He looked like a man who had stopped pretending he could fix something with charm. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without answering. He walked into the living room and stood for a moment, as if unsure where to begin. Then he sat down, not on the couch, but in the old armchair across from mine. Arthur's chair. I made no comment. "I don't know what to say," he finally muttered. "Then don't say anything," I replied. He rubbed his face with his hands. "Everything's a mess." I nodded once. The guests were confused, half left before we could even gather them. Chloe's parents, well, I don't think they'll be speaking to us for a while. I sipped my coffee. He looked up. "You really don't care, do you?" I met his gaze. "That's not true. I care very much. Just not about what you think I should." He slumped back in the chair. "I didn't think it would go like this." "No," I said. "You thought I'd swallow it like I always have." His face twisted. "That's not fair." "But it's true." He didn't deny it. Not this time. "I kept trying to explain to Chloe that you were fine with staying behind the scenes, that you wanted it that way. She thought it would be cleaner if we didn't make a big deal." I leaned forward slightly. "And did you think it would be cleaner to have your mother turned away at the door? Did you think I wouldn't come at all?" "I didn't know you'd want to," he said. And for once, there was no malice, just bewilderment. "You never said." "Because I didn't think I had to." He looked away. "I'm not one for grand speeches, David," I continued. "But I spent my life showing up for you, for everything. School, birthdays, when your marriage fell apart, when you were short on the down payment, when you needed someone to cover the deposit for your daughter's school. I showed up, always." "I know." "No, you don't," I said. "Because if you knew, you would have realized that showing up for your housewarming wasn't some surprise stunt. It was the most natural thing in the world." He nodded slowly. "You're right. That stunned me more than anything. I was proud," he said, voice quieter, "that I'd pulled it all together, that Chloe's family saw me as successful, that everything looked perfect. I didn't want them to see where I came from." I inhaled deeply. "Which means," I said, "you didn't want them to see me." He swallowed hard. "I wasn't ashamed of you," he whispered. "Then why didn't you fight for me?" He looked down. We sat in that silence for what felt like a very long time. Finally, I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured a second cup of coffee and set it in front of him. He stared at it like it might disappear. "I'm not angry anymore, David," I said. "But I'm finished giving parts of myself to people who don't value the whole of me." He nodded, fingers tightening around the cup. "I want to fix this." "You can't." He looked up sharply. "But you can learn from it," I added. "That's the only apology I'll accept." He blinked. "I canceled the housewarming because you erased me," I said. "I'm not interested in guilt or grand gestures. I just want you to understand that this," I pointed to myself, to my home, "is not a resource you can exploit anymore." He sat back, speechless. "I set up a trust," I continued, "for Maya. The money I'd saved for your house, the new car, the trips, it's all going to her now. She's the only one who's ever made me feel seen." "I understand," he said, barely above a whisper. "I doubt that," I said, "but maybe someday you will." He stood slowly, the coffee untouched. "I'll go," he said. I didn't stop him. As he reached the door, he paused. "Mom," he said, I miss how things used to be. I looked at him evenly. Then maybe you shouldn't have changed them. And I closed the door behind him quietly, without regret. The days that followed moved slowly, like the air after a storm, thick but clear. No more calls came from David. Not a text, not a knock, not a letter. And I didn't expect one. Not because he was cruel, but because silence was always his fallback. As a boy, when he got caught lying or hurt someone, he'd go quiet for days, thinking that time would erase the damage. As a man, it had become habit, silence as strategy, as shield. But I no longer sat around waiting for it to end. Instead, I returned to my own rhythm. I planted sunflowers in the front yard. I repainted the back fence. I dropped off soup at Helen's house when I heard her cough through the wall. Simple things. Mine. And in the quiet, something remarkable happened. I began to hear myself again. I remembered the sound of my own footsteps in the hallway when the house was still full. I remembered the voice I used to speak to Arthur in the dark, back when we didn't worry about who needed what and when and how much was left in the bank. I remembered the sharp snap of clean sheets on the line and the way David used to giggle when I pressed them against his cheek and called them sun-warmed. I remembered being a woman, not just a mother. One morning, I found myself pulling out an old photo album, not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. I wanted to see what had been, what was real, what I might have missed, trying to hold everything together. The pictures were all there, birthdays with cake, tiny shoes lined up in the hallway, camping trips, Easter dresses, report cards. I documented it all, like it might someday prove something, that I'd been present, that I'd loved well. But what struck me most wasn't what I'd recorded. It was what I hadn't. There were no photos of me in the hospital after Arthur died. No image of the check I wrote to save David's first struggling business in 2009. No record of the year I canceled my own long-planned trip to help pay for Maya's art school deposit. Those moments, the ones that cost me most, had passed like ghosts, and maybe that's what hurt more than the housewarming. Not that I hadn't been seen, but that I'd made peace with being invisible until now. The knock that came that Friday was soft, hesitant. I opened the door, expecting another delivery, or maybe Helen returning my soup bowl, but it was Maya. She was holding a manila envelope. "Hi," she said. "Can I come in?" Always. She stepped inside and sat at the table without needing to be asked. She wore jeans and a loose cardigan, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked more like herself than she had in weeks. "I have something," she said, setting the envelope in front of me. A letter from Dad. I didn't reach for it. She glanced at me. "He asked me to deliver it. He said he didn't think you'd open it if it came in the mail." "He's right." She nodded. "I haven't read it, but he told me he wrote it by hand." That surprised me. David hadn't handwritten anything since college. I looked at the envelope for a long moment, then slid it toward me and opened the flap. Inside, a few pages folded once. Plain white paper. No greeting card, no typeface, just his handwriting. Slightly shaky, but unmistakable. I read it in silence while Maya waited. "Mom, I don't deserve for you to read this, but I need to write it anyway. I've been replaying everything in my head. Not just the housewarming, all of it. The years of help, the things you gave without asking anything back. The times I should have said thank you and didn't. The times I made you feel small when you were the one holding everything together. You were right. I wanted the image more than the truth. I wanted to look like a man who'd built something on his own. I wanted Chloe's family to see me as someone who had arrived. And I thought, if I just kept you in the background, it would be cleaner. That's the word I keep hearing in my head. Cleaner. But now I see what I really did. I erased you. I watched them turn you away at the door. I heard it. I saw it. And I did nothing. I don't know how to live with that. I can't ask you to forgive me. I'm not sure I'd believe you if you said you did. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry, David. When I finished, I folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Maya watched me carefully. Well, he's trying, I said. That's something. She looked relieved. You're not going to throw it away? No, I said, but I'm not going to frame it either. We sat in silence for a while. I ran my fingers along the edge of the envelope, feeling the weight of the paper, the ink, the time it must have taken to write. It didn't erase what had been done, but it named it. And sometimes that's the beginning of healing. Not forgiveness, not return, just the truth spoken plainly for once. 3 days passed before I heard from Chloe. I hadn't expected her to show up in person. I assumed, if anything, she'd send an email, something composed, distant, carefully crafted to shift blame while appearing gracious. But instead, it was a text, just 3 words. Can we talk? No punctuation, no explanation. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I had nothing left to give. I'd already spent years handing over my time, my grace, my silence. I wasn't going to hand over my attention too, not without reason. The next day, a courier brought a box. No return address, just my name on an envelope taped to the top. Inside, remnants. The ruined housewarming favors. A pair of custom-engraved wine glasses with D and C etched in delicate script. A photo frame still wrapped. The sort of box someone packs when they don't know what to say, but feel they should say something. I didn't open the card right away. Instead, I stood there staring at the glasses, so fragile, so formal, so clearly meant for display, and wondered what Chloe thought this gesture might accomplish. Eventually, I opened the envelope. Eleanor, I don't expect you to respond. I just want you to know that I see now what I didn't before. I saw your name on every receipt when the contractor sent us the final documents. Every stone, every fixture, every inch of that house had your fingerprints on it. I thought I could separate the celebration from the source. I thought money was neutral. It wasn't. You weren't. I wanted something flawless. I wanted a story to tell my family, my clients, my friends, one where everything looked elegant and earned. But I didn't want to include the woman who made it possible because I couldn't control how she fit into that version. I see how shameful that is now. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just didn't want my silence to be the last thing you heard from me. Chloe. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, too careful to be truly sincere, but not cold. I placed the letter back in the envelope, then slid it into the same drawer where I kept David's. Not for keepsake, not for sentiment, just to remind myself that recognition, when it finally arrives, often comes too late to matter. Later that evening, I stood at the kitchen sink, peeling apples for a pie. Not for anyone in particular, just because it felt like a day for baking. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the house, and the silence around me didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I thought about the housewarming, not the disaster it became, but the version they wanted. Perfect, curated, expensive, and how quickly it collapsed once the truth withdrew its support. That's the part they never understood. I wasn't the obstacle. I was the foundation. And now that I'd stepped out from beneath them, they were learning how little their structure could hold on its own. The pie had cooled by morning. I wrapped 2 slices in wax paper and set them aside for Helen. She liked them with her afternoon tea. The rest I stored neatly in the old ceramic dish Arthur once called the inheritance nobody would fight over. He was right. No one had ever asked for it. The quiet in the house that day felt different. Not the weight of loneliness, but the comfort of distance. The kind of silence that comes after you finally said what needed saying. It was an honest stillness. Around noon, Maya called. "Do you want to get out of the house?" she asked. "Just a drive, maybe lunch." "I'd like that," I said. We didn't go far, just the little diner off Route 101, the one with the red booths and the jukebox that never worked. It wasn't elegant, but it was ours, familiar. We sat by the window, ordered sandwiches. I had turkey on sourdough. She had a BLT and iced tea. She sipped her tea and looked at me. I told Dad about the trust. I met her eyes. How did he take it? She stirred her straw. Quietly, I think he expected it. He didn't argue. Good, she hesitated. He wants to try again to fix things. I nodded slowly. Trying is fine, but it's not a promise. She seemed relieved. I told him that. We ate in silence for a while, comfortable now, the kind of silence where nothing needs to be filled. After lunch, we stopped by the park, just walked, no destination. The trees were beginning to shed their leaves early for September, but the breeze was gentle, and the sky was the kind of gray that made the green seem brighter. Maya slipped her arm through mine. You know, everyone talks about starting over like it's this big dramatic thing, but I think it's smaller, quieter. I looked at her. It is. She smiled. I'm proud of you. The words caught me off guard. You did something brave, she continued. Not loud, not cruel, just brave. I looked at her. This girl who'd grown into someone I trusted more than most adults. I squeezed her hand. So did you, for staying. Back home, the house welcomed me like an old friend. I put on the kettle, folded the laundry, refilled the bird feeder. Nothing special, nothing big, but all of it mine. The next day, I received a card in the mail. No return address, no handwriting on the envelope, just my name. Inside was a photograph, a candid taken from the pre-housewarming gathering a few nights before everything collapsed. In it, David was standing near the fireplace, tie slightly askew, looking down at a piece of paper. Behind him, out of focus, Chloe stood adjusting her hair. On the back, in tiny writing, someone had scrawled, "There was a place for you. We just didn't know how to honor it." No signature. I stared at it for a long while. A place, but not a seat, not a name on a list, not a hand offered at the door, just a blurred space behind the curtain, a presence felt, not invited. I placed the photo on the kitchen counter, not framed, not displayed, just there, a reminder. They had wanted the version of me that didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't need. But that version no longer existed, and this one she was just beginning. The following Sunday, I went to church, not out of habit. I hadn't been in years, but because I wanted to sit somewhere quiet where no one expected anything from me. Not money, not answers, not forgiveness, just my presence. The sanctuary was half full. A few familiar faces, some older than I remembered, others softened by time. I sat in the back row, the one near the stained glass window with the chipped corner that Arthur always pointed out when he thought no one was looking. The sermon was about humility, about how grace is not something given to the loudest, but found by the ones who learn to kneel. I didn't kneel, but I listened. And when the choir stood to sing a hymn I hadn't heard since David was a boy in Sunday school, I closed my eyes and let the sound carry me. Not backward, not forward, just here, present. After the service, an older woman I only vaguely remembered approached me. I think her name was Dorothy. "You've lost weight," she said, without preamble. I smiled. "No, I've just stopped carrying things that don't belong to me." She blinked, then nodded once slowly. "Good for you," that was all. No small talk, no gossip, just a shared knowing. Outside, the sun had broken through. I stood on the church steps and felt it warm my shoulders. For a brief moment, I thought about calling David, not to mend anything, just to say I'd heard from God today and hadn't thought of him with anger, but I didn't call. Some silences are better left intact. That afternoon, I returned home to find a package on my porch. No return label. Inside, a small hardcover photo album, handmade, covered in linen. The first page held a single line in David's handwriting. She was there for everything. And then pictures, old ones I hadn't seen in decades. Me holding him on the first day of kindergarten. Me in the crowd at his high school graduation. Me at the kitchen table, mending patches onto his jeans. Me beside the hospital bed when he broke his arm playing soccer. Me with Maya on my hip, reading a story. Me and Arthur on our last anniversary. My hand on his chest, his eyes only for me. No captions, just images, evidence. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. By the time I reached the last page, I realized I'd been holding my breath. I closed the album and rested my hand on the cover. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood, walked to the shelf in the hallway, and made space right in the middle, between the books that had shaped me and the ones I hadn't yet read. It didn't erase what had been done, but it gave me something I hadn't expected, to be seen, not just in pain, but in presence, not just in what I gave, but in who I had been all along. A week passed before I saw David again. It wasn't planned. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared, not on the front porch, but in the backyard, standing near the garden where Arthur used to plant vegetables that never quite thrived. I saw him through the kitchen window, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, waiting, not knocking. I dried my hands on a towel and stepped outside. "You always liked this spot," I said, not as a greeting, but as a reminder. He turned slowly. "Dad used to drag me out here when I didn't want to talk." I nodded. "He knew something happens in the quiet that doesn't happen face to face." He looked down at the grass. "You were right about all of it." I didn't answer. "Some things don't need confirmation." "I'm not here to fix it," he said. "I think I made too much of a mess for that, but I wanted to say something in person. One last thing." He took a breath. "I spent so long chasing approval from Chloe, her family, my coworkers, strangers. I wanted to be the man who built everything on his own. But every good thing in my life was handed to me by a woman I tried to edit out. I crossed my arms, not out of anger, but to keep from shaking. Not because his words were cruel, but because they were finally honest. I was afraid, he said, that people would see where I came from and think less of me. And now, I asked, now I see where I came from and think I was a fool not to be proud of it. The breeze shifted. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing a lawn. Ordinary sounds, nothing cinematic. Chloe left, he said, not dramatically, not fishing. She moved back to her parents' place for now, said she needs time. I nodded. I imagine she does. She said I let someone ruin her housewarming. I looked him in the eye. She's wrong. You let someone fund her housewarming, then you let someone stand outside it. He nodded, no defense left. I took a slow breath. So what now? I don't know, he said. I'm not asking to be let back in. I just want to stop pretending that door was ever closed by anyone but me. That was the truest thing he'd ever said. We stood there for a long time, not hugging, not crying, just sharing space. Finally, I said, there's pie in the fridge. He blinked. Still your peace offering? No, I said. It's just good pie. He smiled. Small, not grateful, not relieved, just tired, human. We walked back inside together. He didn't stay long, just enough to eat a slice. Rinse the plate. Thank me. Not enough to pretend things were fine, but just enough to let me know they might one day be better. When he left, I didn't watch from the window. I didn't need to, because this time he'd said goodbye properly, and that finally was enough. Autumn came earlier than usual that year. The leaves turned with a quiet urgency, as if the trees themselves were ready to let go. Gold and rust and that deep dusky red, the kind that always made Arthur pause mid-step, hand in pocket, eyes soft. I used to tease him for stopping in the middle of the sidewalk just to look at a tree. Now I understood. Stillness demands attention. I began walking more, not far, just around the neighborhood, past the empty lot where the old general store used to be, past the school where David once played a sheep in the Christmas pageant, forgetting all his lines, except bah, past the house with the peeling porch swing that still creaked at night like it had something left to say. No one looked twice at me. I liked that. At the market, the cashier, young, pierced, sweet, handed me my receipt and said, "You always look like you know exactly what you're doing." I smiled. That's new. Back home, I moved through the days with the kind of steadiness that doesn't need announcing. I cleaned out drawers, donated old books, started keeping fresh flowers on the table, not orchids this time, but sunflowers, strong, unapologetic. Maya visited often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just with stories. She'd sit on the floor and go through old photo albums, asking names, writing things down. She'd started calling them archives, as if our life were a museum she was curating. One afternoon she asked me, "Do you miss the family you used to imagine?" I looked out the window. "No," I said. "I miss the woman I used to become for them." She didn't speak, just nodded. And then, "But I like this version better." So did I. Around mid-October, I received a letter, not from David, not from Chloe, not from anyone who owed me anything. It was from Mountain View Builds, a woman named Brenda, the project supervisor. She thanked me for my clarity during the cancellation, said that in 15 years of managing projects, she'd never seen a situation handled with such quiet dignity. Sometimes, she wrote, a cancellation reveals more about a family than the celebration ever could. She included a voucher for a weekend stay at a local inn, valid through next year. No obligation, just an offering. I placed it in the drawer with the other letters. Then, after a moment, I took it out again and pinned it to the fridge. Not because I planned to use it, but because it reminded me. Exits can be elegant too. That week, I bought a new dress. Nothing flashy, just something soft, well-made, fitted to a body I'd finally stopped apologizing for. I wore it to the local gallery opening Maya invited me to, stood beside her as she pointed out brushstrokes and color palettes, speaking with the quiet authority of someone who had learned how to see. A woman approached me near the landscape exhibit. Your granddaughter says you're the reason she became an artist. I didn't deflect, didn't wave it off. I simply said, she's the reason I became brave. Later that night, walking home, Maya slipped her arm through mine. You're not angry anymore, she said. No, I replied. I'm just not invisible. And that, after everything, was its own kind of peace. Winter settled in with less resistance than I expected. No early blizzards, no cracked pipes, just a slow hush. Frost on the windows, breath in the morning air, the kind of cold that made the inside of the house feel more honest. I didn't put up a tree that year, not out of spite. I just didn't feel like decorating for people who weren't coming. Maya came by often. Sometimes she brought soup, sometimes just silence. Sometimes she stayed long enough to nap under the old quilt, the one Arthur's mother stitched before the war. She said my house felt safe. I told her that's what happens when you stop bending it to please ghosts. David sent a Christmas card. Simple, no photo, no glitter, just 3 words inside. I see you. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw it away either. In January, I made something new of my days. I took a pottery class, just once a week, just clay. I wasn't good, but I was present. The instructor kept calling me Elle, like we were friends already, and I let her. There was something humbling in trying, in being bad at something on purpose. One of my classmates, Judith, was 73 and sculpted only birds. She said, I used to sculpt people, but they never stayed. We both laughed harder than the line deserved. That spring, I finally planted vegetables, not for anyone else, just to see if I could make something grow again. They came in crooked, imperfect, but they came. And when I sliced the first tomato into a salad, I didn't think of Arthur. I didn't think of David. I just thought, this is enough. Maya graduated that May. She wore a pale blue dress and walked across the stage like she'd been walking toward it her whole life. When they called her name, I stood, not because anyone else did, just because I wanted her to see me, steady, proud, unafraid of being visible. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd and hugged me so hard my knees ached. She whispered, "You didn't just save me, Grandma. You taught me how to not disappear." I held her tighter. The summer came slow, mornings filled with radio jazz and open windows. I painted. I wrote postcards I never sent. I learned how to poach an egg properly, small things mine. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset over the same trees that had been here since before David was born. A breeze moved through the leaves, soft and certain, and I thought, this is what it means to live unedited. Not loudly, not for show, but fully, completely as myself. If this story meant something to you, if you saw your own silence somewhere in mine, please value yourself. Set those healthy boundaries. You deserve to be seen, to be honored, and to write your own ending. No one else gets to choose how your story ends. Only you do. Word count, 11 on 34. Character count, 60844.